Hi guys, welcome back to Birds, Donuts, and Everything in Between. Today's episode is focusing on physiotherapy, and our guest is Zikra Nilam, who studied Human Kinetics as her undergraduate degree, went on to work as a physiotherapy assistant. She is now working towards her master's in physiotherapy and PhD in Rehabilitation Sciences. She is going to talk to us all about what it takes to become a licensed physiotherapist. Hello, Zikra. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I wanted to have you on here today because I know that you did your undergraduate degree in kinesiology and then you're working as a physiotherapy assistant and also doing your PhD. So I kind of wanted to talk about what the curriculum is like as a kinesiology student, the career fields you can go into after that, and specifically what you're doing as a PTA, and then what you can do with your PhD and what you are doing your PhD in career fields after that as well. So you can take it away from here and introduce yourself.
Thanks. Yeah, for sure. So I did my undergrad at the University of Windsor. Their kinesiology program is called Human Kinetics. When I went into my undergrad, it was kind of different than what it currently is now. There are two main streams that you can go into. You can either go into the movement science stream, which is that typical science route, or you could go into that sports management stream, which is more of like that sports versus like business kind of collab. Um, I went into the movement science, but the way in which it worked when I was there was that the first year was very generalized. So you had courses from sport management and movement science kind of to understand what each stream kind of tasted like. And then by second year, that's when you would actually go into specific courses that were aligned with your stream. So I went into movement science. I knew that I was going to go into physiotherapy when I was in high school. I really enjoyed that kind of field. I loved the way that we can kind of mesh both like exercise and medicine together and kind of create this like rehab field, and it was amazing. I loved it. I did co-op when I was in high school, and so I got an idea of what it was like, and I was like, okay, this is what I want to go into. um, Technically, when you want to become a physiotherapist, you don't have to have a specific undergrad that you need to go into. Typically, people do go into human kinetics because it kind of follows that stream of movement science and physical activity and exercise and physiology. But people go into anywhere from biology, regular sciences. I mean, you could do an arts undergraduate degree really, as long as you had the requirements to do your master's in physiotherapy. Each school obviously is different for their masters, but typically it's along the science route. So it makes sense to do an undergrad in science rather than do it in a different field and then have to study for these science backgrounds on your own time. But I chose to go into human kinetics. I think University of Windsor has like a fabulous human kinetics program. I think it's really strong in their academics and especially in research too. A lot of people don't really understand what kind of things go into kinesiology research or even just physiotherapy research. All of it is really cool, and it might not be like in a lab with like a lab coat and stuff, but some can be. In the physiology stream, you can look specifically at muscle biopsies and look into that, or you could do a more like general research route like psychology and looking into like motivation and what kind of causes people to burn out while they are training for any kind of sport. So there's really like a huge variety, and so I really enjoyed doing that when I was in human kinetics at the University of Windsor. um, but I knew that I was going into movement science, so most of the courses I did take were along the movement science route. um, my favorite courses when I was in first year would definitely have to be human anatomy. um, the human anatomy in HK is a little bit different than human anatomy that you would experience on main campus, um, or basically in any school, regardless of the university that you're in, because it really focuses on the muscles and the anatomy and movement. So we kind of take away from the whole like microorganism and we look at the bigger picture. Okay, so like what can, if we flex this muscle, like if we flex this muscle or contract this muscle, what movement can that create? So I think that was really interesting because that really provided me with an in-depth understanding of the direction that human kinetics would go in comparison to science, right? Because a lot of people would be like, okay, well, what's the difference then? If you go into sciences and you do the physiology and you do the anatomy, then why would you go into human kinetics? So human kinetics definitely does have a little bit of this niche, but it's a nice type of niche. So, you know, if you know that you're not into cells and all that different stuff, sure, we do learn about cells, but they're very much directed towards specific muscles and tissues and things that can look at the bigger picture of overall rehabilitation. So that was definitely one of the most interesting courses that I had. I believe it is mandatory anyways. I think by first year, if you're going into movement science, you do have to take like sports psychology, you have to take ethics in sports. There's the introduction to exercise physiology. So again, it is kind of like human physiology, but we don't focus on super like minuscule details. We kind of look at different details that are related to movement and like muscle contraction and all that stuff that we typically don't dwell too much into when you're in like a different like science undergraduate. Um, we do have to take a stats course, at least in University of Windsor. It's called Measurement and Evaluation. And it's very similar to the stats courses on main campus. So but that there's not much difference, but it just kind of helps you to understand how research and the background behind like research and measurement and stuff go along, because I think um, human kinetics, at least at the University of Windsor, really focuses on research. They like to combine what you learn in class with real life experiences, and they really focus on like pushing that experiential learning. That's what I really enjoyed about that. And then moving forward, you just go through different advanced courses, from advanced physiology to advanced biomechanics. And you could even go, and then by the time you're in like third and fourth year, you go into these even more specialized routes. So you can do specifically looking at like cardiac physiology. You can look at sport nutrition. There's even these courses looking specifically at obesity and eating disorders. A lot of course there's like a whole psychological component to that, but there's still that science behind it. And that's super interesting. And then you can go into even like the pathophysiology of pain, so trying to understand where pain is coming from. So you have all these specific niche courses that they offer. These are all courses that you can take. There's none of them are mandatory. You just have to take the certain amount to get that like the course requirements for the degree. But I think that they have an amazing course selection, and it can range from so many different things, and it really does provide you with a little taste of each little path to a certain career. So a lot of people wonder, okay, well, when you graduate from human kinetics, what can you do? Um, there are multiple things that you can do. Like I had alluded to earlier, whenever you want to go into any kind of field, doing a master's or whatever, sometimes it's not necessarily that you require a specific undergraduate degree. You just need to meet those course requirements or the prerequisite requirements. So in that case, we do have a handful of students who do like to go into medical school post human kinetics. So they just have to take a little bit of some extra courses that aren't offered here, so that they can meet those requirements to write the MCAT and all of that. We also have a group of students who graduate and they end up taking the kinesiology test, so that they end up becoming registered kinesiologists. So a kinesiologist is not a physiotherapist, but they are well versed in a lot of the same fields. So in terms of exercise rehabilitation, and from techniques such as taping and all of these different things that you can learn. And so you have this, you are under a college, so you are registered, and you do have like a credential for that, and you don't have to do any further education. You can just take that test right after human kinetics. And so with that, you can work in any field you want, really, as long as you're a kinesiologist. That can range from nursing homes, like kinesiologists at nursing homes, kinesiologists at long-term cares. You can have kinesiologists at physiotherapy clinics, and they also have kinesiologists at chiro clinics too. So really, you can use that knowledge and kind of spread your wings to anywhere. You could even be a kinesiologist on the sports team. So it does have a lot of avenues that you can take. The only limitation is that you wouldn't be able to necessarily assess patients and diagnose them with certain ailments or muscular deformities or something. You would have to be under a different caregiver, such as a physiotherapist. But aside from that, there really is no limitation with being a kinesiologist. So that's a really good avenue that you can take. There are so many things that people do post human kinetics. So it doesn't necessarily have to be physiotherapy. A lot of people think, oh, you're going to be a chiropractor or a physiotherapist, and that's about it. But you can be from ranging from a coach, you could do teaching and research, go into that field. You can go into the rehabilitation field, like the physiotherapy, or you could even go into like a fitness and wellness kind of field where you're looking at nutrition, you're looking at even like psychological disorders related to food. So you can look into that. You can obviously be an athletic therapist. You could go into medicine and kind of branch off from there. There are so many different options that you can take with human kinetics. And I think the limitation that people have is that they only focus on those obvious career paths. And so they think, okay, well, if I go into human kinetics, I'm not going to be able to have a whole a bunch of opportunities because I'm only be able to do like physiotherapy and whatnot. So there you can basically take that knowledge and apply it to so many different fields, from nutritions to naturopaths and all these different things. So really the sky's the limit at this point, as long as it's in the same path.
Are there like specific fields after graduating that are more in demand for someone with your background?
Um,
Like you mentioned,
it's
so many career opportunities,
yes,
but are there some that are more so like I know you said people only focus on the main things that you can do with the degree, but that there are so
right.
many others, but are there some that are actually more in demand?
To my knowledge, the way in which our society is going, with baby boomers becoming seniors and kind of switching it where majority of our population is not only these younger kids, but also these older adults. From my knowledge, currently physiotherapy and that like rehabilitation sciences route is definitely in more demand right now. But I think it really does depend, because we are also in a generation or a society where people are open minded to different options for medicine. So I can assure you, like 20 years ago, having a naturopath probably wasn't, something people would necessarily consider, because the knowledge behind that is like very slim, and it was kind of seen as an outrageous or like maybe not as serious of a field. So no one would really go to a naturopath to get advice or anything. They just go to the doctor, they get the medicine they need, and that was about it. So I think the way in which our generation is, I could use the term pretty woke, as they're, moving through society. I things like that, that those kind of fields are kind of booming a little bit, because people are looking for alternative medicine routes, right? So there's that. And I guess the whole idea of just being fit, there's this whole culture around being fit right now. It's unfortunately more of a trend than it is to actually be healthy. But nonetheless, it's still something that is very popular and is, very like it's increasing. So people are looking for these personal trainers. People are looking for all of these different avenues to attain better health, whether that's a nutritionist or something of that sort. So people are looking more into those fields. So I really do think that human kinetics in general, like going into that, like that food industry, the health industry, anything that revolves around like medicine, fitness, body, and that is definitely something that is going to require more jobs moving in the future. So I think if going in that route would be optimal. But again, any route, as long as you know what you want, you have that motivation, success is definitely going to be an outcome. Um, and everyone defines success differently. We can't say that, oh, yeah, like, like I make this much money, I'm successful. Sometimes it's not even about the money that you make, it's really just about how happy you are with the career that you have. And so, again, you just kind of find the route that you know is the best for you. If money is your driver, then by all means, yeah, like go into a field that it's going to give you good money. But if money is not your driver and it's more so this passion where it's like you want to be in a field that you don't feel like you're working every day, then that would kind of be the route I would take. But in general, I do think that the whole rehabilitation field is definitely more in demand opposed to other fields. But again, you kind of choose what you want to go into.
Okay, cool. Okay, so before I move into asking you about your job and your PhD, I had a few other questions about your undergrad. Were there
Sure.
any like really useful courses that you had taken that you think like if you don't have a good handle on this information, you should not be, licensed to work in the in industry?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely do think that there are specific courses um, that give you a better understanding of what you want to go into. Um,
Yeah, or
and
some of the courses that form like the backbone of your degree. Like if you had to pick five courses, maybe like some that like the most important courses,
mhm,
what years would you take them in and what were they revolving around?
sure. So, like I mentioned earlier on, human anatomy.
Mm-hmm.
If you're gonna go, I'm gonna speak on behalf of like the stream of physiotherapy because I know that one the most. But if you are going into physiotherapy or you want to become a chiropractor, no, understanding human anatomy is a necessity. That is definitely your whole basis is understanding human anatomy. So if you're finding that that course is something that you are struggling with, but you enjoy, then go get the help you need to make sure that you succeed in that. If you're finding that you're struggling in it because you don't enjoy it, then maybe it's not something that, physiotherapy isn't something that you should go into because that is definitely like the backbone of physiotherapy. It's the foundation of it all. Another important course that I took in fourth year is physiological basis of sport therapy. So it's very similar. It's like a baseline for what sport therapy is and essentially also kind of branching out into physiotherapy. And so this course basically was like, okay, if you're going to assess someone really quickly, these are the things you need to do. And based off of these symptoms, what do you think is their ailment or what do you think you can diagnose them with? And it's, of course, we only talk like on the very surface of what we can actually diagnose people with, but it's a very, very small but good intro to what physiotherapy is. Along with this course is actually a lab. And so you actually go in person and you do this experiential learning type thing where you can actually, they teach you specifically how to tape, they teach you how to measure joint angles, they actually teach you all these different things, and so you have these physical um skills that you probably will and forever use if you go into physiotherapy. So it's definitely a good intro. So definitely those two I would say is the most important, anatomy and the sports therapy. Aside from the other courses, of course, physiology is important and stuff, but on a day-to-day basis, you're not going to look into the physiology of people when you're in the physiotherapy field. It's important to know, and you obviously require it when you're going to go get your degree. But I would say if you are considering physiotherapy and you don't know if it's the right path for you, definitely take anatomy in the first year so you know that. And then any other courses that are revolving around sport therapy or even just movement.
Okay, okay, cool. And these courses would be like first year, second year, like I'm assuming first or second year if they're like the basis of everything.
So human anatomy is definitely involved in the first year. You can have like you can look into possibly like physiology of fitness in second year. That is definitely a more physiology type course, but it does provide you with a little bit more understanding of these bases that you will use in like physiotherapy. So for example, you learn about like muscle fatigue, you learn about muscle contractions, you learn about, how to build muscle mass. That's all important stuff that you need to know in physiotherapy. So these are courses that are offered first and second year. When you go to third and fourth year, you end up with those more specific courses like the sport therapy course that I had mentioned. Um,
But
but
they
I
might
think
like
that
build off stuff that you had learned in first year. Like, yeah.
yes, and the reason why they have these courses like sport therapy in like the later years is because it does kind of build off of human anatomy and physiology and even a little bit of biomechanics. So it really builds off of all that stuff, and you need to have that knowledge before you can go into those courses. But like I think it's really important because even by fourth year, if you take a course like sport therapy and you're like, oh, actually, this is not something I think I want to go into, you still have the option to kind of switch your path, like switch your career around. Sure, you're not going to go into physiotherapy, but you're still into this field. So there are a lot of other options that you can take, like I mentioned, being a kinesiologist or going into naturopath or nutritionist or even being an athletic therapist. It really is, there really are like a lot of opportunities. So I don't think people should even worry that when they get into their fourth year and they find out that maybe the career path they had in mind isn't the one that they want to pursue. That's okay, because there still is time for them to kind of switch it around, and turn your life around, because it wouldn't be fair to yourself if you go into a career that you're just not interested in or happy about.
Right. Does it, would you say the courses lean more towards biology or more towards physics or more towards like a different, like people can do a pure biology degree, or a pure physics degree or a pure math degree, but this is kind of a mix of everything. So what does it lean more towards? I was just curious.
I think definitely biology.
Oh, okay.
um
Yeah,
yeah,
because
because
I was
if
thinking of like biomedical engineering, and I know students there, they take engineering courses, but then it's also kind of like a mix of kinesiology and engineering, and it's biomedical engineering. Um, and they take a lot of it's like biomechanics, like physics, but also biology. Okay, yeah, I was just curious about that. Um, were you
yeah,
gonna say
definitely
something? Yeah.
biology. Yeah, because like if you recall, um basis biology in high school, it basically breaks it down into like you have that physiology section, you have you talk about other sections, but like it breaks it down into like, and you have like the organs systems and all that stuff. So I think most of that does come from human kinetics. So
Mhm.
if you were going to just choose a specific kind of field that it leans heavily towards, I would definitely say bio. It definitely does include a lot of that physics part too, with biomechanics and all of that, ergonomics, but definitely bio if anything.
Okay. And also, you mentioned that a lot of students or some students go to med school or maybe other, graduate schools after kinesiology. And I was wondering for somebody, for example, if a student wanted to, go to med school, but they decide not to do a 4-year biology degree and do a 4-year kinesiology degree just as like a backup instead, because you can't really do much with, just a psychology or a biology degree unless you want to go into research, or students have, other plans for graduate school. But you could work as a kinesiologist, as you had mentioned, after 4 years, right? So if someone decided to do that instead of just a pure bio degree, actually, let me just reword the question. So you mentioned that a lot of students or some students go to medical school after this degree. If a student had chosen to do a kinesiology degree instead of doing, just a pure bio or psychology degree, what was my question? Now I forgot the question. I was writing it down and then I deleted it because it was in my head. Okay. I
Do you
think
want
I
to
was
like undo it and see if you can find it?
have to shake it and do it. I can only undo and redo.
uh
Anyways, I think I was gonna say like what would give me a minute.
okay.
Yeah, I think what I can ask then, I don't remember exactly what I was gonna ask, but I think what I want to ask is how difficult would it be for somebody to do this and go to med school versus a pure bio degree? Is it something that people should consider, or do you think that it's more difficult to keep your grades up in this degree?
That's a very good
Because I
question.
know a lot of students wanting to go to med school, but they want a degree that's kind of like a backup degree almost. And a lot of students don't want to do engineering and pursue medical school after that because engineering is like notoriously known for dropping your grades. But
Hmm.
people want to do something that kind of like give them the prerequisites that they need for med school, as well
Hmm.
as so I know students who did biomedical engineering and did go on to med school, but then I also know students who did biology and then went to med school. But those biomedical engineering students had, an engineering job kind of lined up after graduation if they didn't get into med school. So that's kind of like
Right.
like what I meant by backup degree. And
Sure.
kinesiology can work as that can work for that as well. But is it something that people should consider? Is it like known to be very difficult to keep your grades up? That's what I was kind of wondering. Like what's the scale of difficulty?
Sure. It's definitely difficult to say because a lot of people, they go into this field and the first thing they think of is like, oh, it's like gym class. But it's not the case. And you will know that when you actually go into HK, especially the first year, they really like to weed people out. People who just think this is going to be basically like the term bird course, but bird program. They think that it's going to be a program where you can get really high grades. Any program you can get high grades as long as you do the work and you study for it. The level of difficulty is not as hard as engineering, and that's coming from my own personal opinion. I'm sure other people can have other opinions about that, but I don't think that it's at that same level of difficulty. So typically, yes, I would think that you can get higher overall grades. Lots of students successfully go into med school post undergraduate of human kinetics. However, there are caveats to that. There are specific courses you end up having to take in addition to the requirements for human kinetics. And yes, it is a little bit easier, but it's not that easier. It can be a handful. So if you're trying to balance third and fourth year human kinetics courses with like cell bio and all of these other courses from main campus, or other programs, you can burn out. It can be very challenging, and that could drop your grades. So really, it wouldn't be a good idea to go into human kinetics thinking that, oh, it's going to be boosting up my med school applications. I also wanted to mention, I think you had asked about, having like backup careers. And the only thing is that, yes, you can have a career post human kinetics. But the thing is, if you're intending to have the same reward as maybe going into med school, like a medical career, compared to a career that you would get from a human kinetics degree, the rewards are not necessarily the same, right? Being a doctor versus being a kinesiologist. So they don't. If that's going to be your backup, sorry, it's probably not the most ideal backup in that case, because they don't align on the same, I guess, pyramid of career paths.
I see. That makes sense. Okay, moving on. Thank you for that.
No problem.
Okay, so okay, yeah, I think that was pretty much all the questions I had for your undergrad degree.
Yeah.
Except actually no. So I was wondering, another question I had was, did you get a chance to do internships? Are they like part of your program, like a co-op internship? How does that work?
Yeah, definitely. Human Kinetics at the University of Windsor, at least, they offer co op for sure. And it runs very similar to the co op from other programs. I believe it starts in second year, and then you kind of, depending on when your co op semester is, you work, and then you come back to school and you do your courses. And a lot of the times, kids end up having to do a fifth year just to make up for the courses that weren't offered. Because if they have co-op during a winter semester or a fall semester, sometimes those courses aren't going to be offered in the summer. So they have to kind of wait a whole year before they can take those requirements. So there is that to that, but it's not a big deal in terms of if that's if you want to say it's a bad quality from co-op. I don't think so. I just think it just, prolongs a little bit of your undergrad. They do have internships. I believe that's offered in third year. You can, I think, do it in fourth year, but I think it's mainly for third years. And it very similar. It's just one semester that you do it in. Go to a place, find a place, and they can be paid or unpaid depending on the employer that you're with. And yeah, it's so you can get some experience from that too. So they have both co-op and internship as options.
Okay, sounds good. So then after you graduate, you mentioned that people can be licensed to become a kinesiologist. So is that like a state by state or province by province license?
I think there is a entire Canadian college for kinesiology.
Oh, so
I
once you
could
write an
be
exam,
mistaken.
like in Ontario, you can work in Alberta.
Yes, I believe so. I don't think that it would just be specifically for Ontario.
Okay,
And that same thing applies to physiotherapy. So it's the College of Physiotherapy is a Canadian wide college. So people from different provinces can work in different provinces. I
that's
believe
nice.
that's the
Okay.
case. Yeah.
Because I know that there are, I know people like in social work, for example, they need it like province by province or state by state. They have to write an exam. So it's very difficult to move around the country. Once you're licensed in one place, you don't want to write the exam for another location usually.
Hmm.
Okay. Okay. So then what else? So you had already talked about, some of the career fields that people can get into after graduating. So then can you talk a bit more about what you're specifically doing after you oh, can you talk a bit more about what you did after graduation and what you're doing now?
So after I graduated, I my goal was to go into a field that I was able to do physiotherapy, but I also kind of wanted to really focus on the research aspect too. Being in human kinetics at the University of Windsor has really has really shown me that research is something that I love and I'm passionate about, and I want to kind of pursue that as well. So, in the hopes of doing that, I did end up taking a minor in the education program, and that kind of provided me with a little bit of some knowledge in schooling and teaching. So with that, I was looking into programs like in the master's level or graduate level that would allow me to be able to do physiotherapy, but also extensive research. So, not just a simple research project that you kind of do for a semester or so, it's more so like an extensive kind of continuing research. So, with that, I stumbled upon the program at Western University. So, that's in London, Ontario. And they have this combined program where you can actually complete both your PhD and your master's in physiotherapy together. So essentially, the way that it would work is that it would split up your degree time. So for the first 2 years, you would kind of focus on your PhD. So you'd be considered a PhD candidate. Then you'd kind of switch over the next 2 years and you would do your physiotherapy in your master's in physiotherapy and you'd become a registered physiotherapist. And then the last year, you would finish off with your PhD. So it's not necessarily that you're doing it simultaneously, but you're doing them together so that one can kind of help with the other. And that was definitely the route that I wanted to take because I was able to do extensive research while also doing my physiotherapy and obviously leading me to a path where I could potentially teach.
Nice. Okay, so have a couple questions about this. So can you talk a little bit more about what you do day to day right now, like in your job, and then we'll jump into your PhD.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Um, so my job, I work as a PTA, so a physiotherapy assistant, and essentially, um, I'm also a kin student, so I do necessarily not. I'm not registered as a kin, but I do the day to day as a kinesiologist would do, and so that would be seeing patients after they've been assessed by a physiotherapist. Get a background as to what their medical history is and what their injuries are, and the physiotherapists, what they do is they kind of set out a general plan. And then they say, okay, so this is a plan I want to do, carry this out, and then just come back and, we can brief on what's going on. And so that's typically what I do. So I have these patients in my schedule. I go to see them. I follow the basis of what the physiotherapist requires. And then obviously, based off of what they need and any changes, I will make changes to that. And then I will just debrief the physiotherapist after. So I definitely do. I'm able to see patients. Most of that is exercise, like teaching them how to exercise, performing exercises with them, performing like laser treatments or ultrasound treatments, taping. If we're doing anything manual like soft tissue treatments, or if we're doing like active release or anything along the lines of that, I can do and I do. Um, so it's nice to be able to actually be in that environment, as I'm also studying in that field, because I can really put what I learn in school into what I do at work and vice versa. I can take what I learn from work and put that into what I do in school. Because a lot of the times, yes, theory is definitely the backbone of everything. But when you go into the real world, it's different, right? Nothing is ever by the book. A simple diagnosis of something is never going to pan out maybe this the exact same way that it does in a textbook. So what it kind of my experiences can really help me to understand the realities of rehabilitation, and then based off of that that can drive and fuel my research, because maybe there is a section that I find out when I'm working that, oh wait, this kind of field is really limited in research, so maybe that's what I can go into. And so it kind of, each of them kind of fuels one another.
Interesting. So when you're working as a PTA, what's going to be different once you graduate and you can just work as a PT directly?
So the main difference is that I wouldn't be working under a physiotherapist. So technically, currently, right now, whatever I do, it is still under it's still under a physiotherapist. So if I make a mistake, that goes under them. It's because they are responsible for me, and so if anything happens, then they would be responsible for that because it's their patient. So that would be one of the differences. The second difference would be that I wouldn't necessarily be able to assess people um, right now. So if a person is a new patient and they come in, they do have to see a physiotherapist, and the physiotherapist has to come up with the diagnosis or the treatment plan or whatever going first into it. And they do all the reassessments, and they do all of the notes for the doctors and all that stuff. So when I become a physiotherapist, I would be able to do what I do currently, plus be able to assess and speak directly to a patient as their primary caregiver.
I see. When you're working as a PTA, you don't need to be licensed, right? But as a PT, would you have to be licensed?
Yes, you would. So you can get a cert like a certificate for PTAs. We do have a program like that in Windsor, so you can definitely do that. But if you want to work as a physiotherapist, you have to do your master's and you have to pass the licensing exam, and you have to be licensed because it has to be monitored because it is a medical service that you're providing, and it needs to be monitored by a college to make sure that there are ethical practices being carried out.
So you have to get into like physiotherapy school, kind of like medical school to do, or you just do like your general master's.
So your master's would have to be in physiotherapy.
Okay, but there's no like physiotherapy school. It's
There
not like medical school kind of.
no, so
Okay.
you can, yeah, so the physiotherapy programs are offered at different universities, and so like obviously, just like they have faculties, they have the school of physiotherapy, but it's not like a medical school where it's just the whole building is like kind of just physiotherapy. It is part of a part of an university.
Oh, I see. Okay. So I was going to ask what I remembered my question. It was going to be that when people graduate as a PT, do a lot of people end up opening their own clinics or do most people go and work under someone else?
I don't know the stats behind that, but I have seen both. Um, People are definitely allowed to do whatever they want to do. Physiotherapists are not necessarily. going to reside in clinics or private clinics for that matter. You can be a physiotherapist at a hospital. You could be a physiotherapist at a nursing home or a retirement home. So physiotherapists can work at different locations as well. It's not necessarily just a clinic, but those who do go into clinics, tend to open up their own practices. But with that, you need to have kind of like a business mind as well. You can't just go into physiotherapy and say, oh, I want to open up my own practice, but have no background knowledge of opening up a business or having a business unless you have a partner who can do that for you. Um, I do know a lot of physiotherapists who just go in and work at like under private clinics to begin with, just to get a grasp of what it is like and the career and kind of, gaining their knowledge. And once they do that and they see the day to day activities that a clinic goes through and how to manage that, then they can go ahead and start their own clinic as well. So I think there's a mixture between both. It's not as simple as snapping your fingers and starting your own clinic. So I think that it would be smart to think about that prior to going into the field, even if you think, okay, well, I want to go into physiotherapy, but my main goal is to open up my own clinic. Well, then maybe you need to make sure that you have a business degree or something to support you or some kind of knowledge to help you to be able to run a business.
Oh, that's a good point too, because they don't teach you business schools when you're, sorry, they don't teach you business knowledge when you're in school for something like physiotherapy.
No, it's all about that rehabilitation, right? It's not
Right.
about I mean, there could be like maybe one or two courses that kind of talk to, practices when owning a clinic, but I think that falls under more ethical practices opposed to just making money, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I would just be aware of that before thinking that, oh, yeah, I'm going to become a physiotherapist and I'll own my own clinic and I'll make so much money. You're
Right.
going to have to have a stronger foundation before we're
Right.
doing that.
Well, it's also the same thing with a doctor who wants to
Sure.
start their own business and any other field. Yeah. Okay. So then I was a little confused on what's the crossover between, physiotherapist and a chiropractor. Like if you have your master's in physiotherapy, can people go and work as a chiropractor, or is that something people just do after 4 years of undergrad?
So there is definitely a blurred line between chiropractors and physiotherapists, but they're still very, very distinct. So, for example, you cannot graduate as a physiotherapist and then work as a chiropractor. They're completely separate careers. If you want to be a chiropractor, you do have to go into a chiropractic school, and you do have to study for that, and then again do a chiropractic licensing exam. And I believe chiros are actually considered when they graduate, um, they're considered doctors. Not that they are allowed to prescribe medication. I believe they can talk to medication, but I don't think they're even allowed to prescribe or distribute medication. But it's more so that they are considered like doctors of like musculoskeletal system type thing. But again, it's a little bit different between physiotherapists and chiros. Um, when you think of a chiropractor, you think of more like specifically like joints and alignments and realigning myself and cracking myself, like cracking like my bones and all of these different things. Um, Whereas physiotherapy is really, I mean, chiropractor does focus on like musculature and, okay, let's loosen this muscle out. Let's kind of, strengthen it. But more so, that's the physio route. They like to diagnose you, see what's going on. And then we're not here to manipulate your body necessarily. We can do like traction, which kind of opens up the spaces in your joints, but we're not going to quote unquote realign your body. What we're going to do is we are going to provide you with a more long-term benefit by um, exercising and strengthening the muscles that are around those joints so that those muscles will naturally realign, quote unquote, any like misaligned joints. And most of the cases too, like yes, unless you have like an impact accident or something that does misalign your joints necessarily, you don't necessarily have joints that randomly get misaligned without an actual method of injury. So if any issues that you're having, it's a lot of the times it's around your musculature. Obviously, there are other cases where it's about mechanical aspects too. So we definitely look at all of those aspects, but more so we're looking at like long-term care and providing that instead of just going hands-on and just, okay, let me just manually go in and manipulate your body.
Oh, I see. So then if someone were to graduate, like, so, okay, so what you're saying is like to be a chiropractor, you can't do a master's of physiotherapy, but do people usually have a master's when they're chiropractors?
Um,
Or is this
I
something you can
bel
do straight out of university?
No, so I there's definitely another schooling that you need to do. I believe it is a master's as
Okay.
well. But to be honest, I'm not exactly sure the requirements, but the last time I heard it was like a year and a half or less than that of a physiotherapist.
Okay.
It's not as
As long.
time consuming as being a physiotherapist.
Okay, I see. Okay, and then with okay, so for people who do have their masters in physiotherapy, they can kind of really only work as a physiotherapist or do research. There's really no other things, right? They can that's it. Like they're very specialized at that point.
Yeah, like it is very specialized. Like so you can, like you will always be considered a physiotherapist, but the thing about physiotherapy is that it encompasses a lot. So it's a lot of the times people think physiotherapy is about being in a private clinic and you're kind of just working with like the muscles and joints and all that stuff. And you still are always working with muscles and joints, but you're not necessarily going to be in the clinical field. You could even have like looking at like being a physiotherapist, but being in like um, the neuro floor at the hospital. So really kind of focusing more on neurological issues. So trying to create that connection between your brain and your muscles and trying to work it that way, because maybe your muscles are strong and they are effective, but it's just the connection, the systems and the pathways that are a little bit interrupted, and so you kind of have to work with that. We have like similarly like respiratory therapists and all of that stuff. So there are definitely further niches that you can go into when you have physiotherapy that you don't need to like specialize in, because you learn about all of this stuff while you do your master's in physiotherapy. Most commonly, you're going into a clinic, but a lot of the times there are other options that people can take. So I wouldn't be worried that becoming a physiotherapist is like the end. Like
Oh, okay.
there's nowhere else that you can go, because there are avenues that you can take using that degree to go beyond.
Okay, I see. And then so you're in school right now, and you just finished your first year of school, right? So you're going to your second year of your 5-year PhD and master's program. So can you talk a little bit about that, as well as like what kind of research do you do?
Yeah, for sure. So I took a little bit of a different approach when I was going into this program. A lot of the times, people who do go into the program have already completed a master's, so they kind of have a background in research and master level statistics and all of that. So me coming straight from my undergrad and going into this program, it was a little bit of a challenge, um, because I have only background knowledge in undergraduate courses, and now I have to do PhD level courses. So you can definitely see that there's this learning curve that needs to be, well, it's more like a steep dive.
Well, isn't it a master's and PhD program combined? So wouldn't they teach you everything you need to know for the master's as well?
So, like I had mentioned earlier, the typical pathway that this program takes is that the first 2 years is actually your PhD.
Mm-hmm.
So you do
Oh,
your
oh, yeah,
PhD,
yeah.
right? And then you go into your PhD for the first 2 years, and then the second 2 years, you switch over to your master's in physiotherapy, and then you end off with your PhD. So they're two separate programs, they're two separate like schools essentially. So they don't necessarily cross over. It's just that I'm doing them like simultaneously.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So I would I ended up having to take a couple not required courses, but they were master level courses just so that I was able to understand what was happening. One, I did go and take my PhD level courses. It wasn't difficult. I mean, it was difficult, but it wasn't impossible. It just I ended up having to take more courses typically than a regular person who would have already have done their masters and went into this program would have taken. And I think I continue to do that just so that I, not having even a 2-year master's on my belt of skills can definitely limit me when it comes to certain statistics that I want to conduct in research. So what I have to really do is be able to take all of the courses that I know that's going to help me do better in my PhD level courses. And so it was kind of more, having to take more courses and having to suck that up and just be like, okay, it is
Mhm.
what it is. It's going to be a little challenging, but this is the pathway I took. Um, the research that I do, I'm in one of the labs that I'm in. So it's called the Pearl Lab. And essentially there are many different, it's actually a pretty cool lab because there are different fields that people are involved in. So we literally touch base with um, the nitpicky physiology parts of understanding certain things to the basis of psychology, and then looking even at biomechanics. So the lab that I work in kind of focuses on two things. One of the main focuses is understanding pain. So, what is pain? How do we measure pain? How can we tell if someone has more pain than somebody else? And why does someone have more pain than somebody else, and what really causes all of this? And so they kind of look into all of it. Is like, is there genetic markers related to pain? So this lab that I'm in kind of focuses on all of those aspects, and even like the psychological aspects of pain. The field that I'm kind of going into is the sex differences between pain, males and females. Okay, what is the difference between pain? Because statistics have shown time and time again that women rate pain more frequently and at more intensely than men do. So it's like, well, why is that? Well, let's look at the measurements. How are these being measured? Are they valid measurements? Should we have to go back in and try to create new methods of measurement of pain so that they can actually represent people's pain? Or is it that the measurements are fine, but it's the mechanisms behind pain that we're not understanding? And so I'm kind of looking into the mechanisms part of it, trying to see, okay, well, is it a psychosocial mechanism that is driving pain, or is it an actual mechanical thing? um, what I'm looking into is the difference between men and women, specifically looking at breast size and weight, in relation to neck and back pain, because a lot of the times anecdotally women who have larger breasts tend to have more neck and back pain. So, kind of looking into that field and seeing if there really is a relationship between those two things, or if the neck and back pain is completely separate from the breast weight and size. And even if they are related, then would undergoing a breast reduction be effective? Because the consequences of undergoing such an invasive surgery are very high. So we want to make sure that, are the rewards that you're getting from undergoing a breast reduction going to be worth um, the 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 potential consequences that you could be experiencing? So that's kind of the field that I'm going to be doing my research in, that I've already started doing my research in. And it's pretty unique, just to kind of look into these specific types of research and the avenues that you can take. But this is just a small part of it. There are so many options out there. This is just the research that's happening in the lab that I'm working in, one of the many research projects, but you could go into different types of research altogether.
Oh, I see. So what were you able to choose like what you wanted to do your research in, or how did you go about that? Because I know with PhDs usually like there's a dissertation and an advisor involved. So yeah, like were you able to choose your advisor, or they kind of place you with whoever's available and you don't really get to choose what you want to do your research in because you do it in what the advisor is doing it in, if that makes sense?
That makes a lot of sense. And so I guess I should mention this earlier. So when you're actually going into and you're applying for this program, basically any master's program, any research program that does focus on research, graduate program, I mean, um, you do have to choose an advisor. You have to reach out and see, well, who is available, who are accepting new students, and is the research that they're doing going to interest me? Can I see myself fitting and doing research in their lab? So what you have to do is kind of do your own research prior to even applying, because you want to make sure that the opportunities that are offered at the university that you're going into, are some things that you're interested in. Because research if there are lots of research opportunities, but none of them are something that you're interested in, then is it really worth going into that? Or is there a different university that can offer something better? So there's that when even deciding which university to go into. And then after that, if you do find, okay, I really am interested in what this research lab is doing at this university, well, are they accepting new students? Who is the lead professor? Who can I talk to? Who will be willing to take in new students? So you kind of have to do this, hunting where you look at their website, you kind of look at their social media. A lot of researchers have their own Twitter accounts where they kind of talk just about their research and other research related to that. So I would definitely reach out, understand the researcher at an academic level and then at a academic but social level as well. So trying to look into all their social medias. And then obviously the main thing you need to look at is all of the publications that they have done. You need to read their research and really understand what they're trying to get at, what their goal is, and if that aligns with something you'd like to do. And if at the end of all of that, you find that, you know what, this is a great match for me, then you go out and you email the professor or whoever it is that you need to email, and you say, hey, like introduce yourself, say, hey, I'm, a new student, potential student, and I'm interested in, joining your lab. Here's a little bit about me, blah, blah, blah. If you want to attach your CV, I would do that. It's very important to have an updated CV with that. Um, it's basically like your resume, but more specifically an academic resume. So you want to be able to upload that as well. So they know who you are, give them all the information that you have and say, I'm really interested. I want to apply to this program. Would you be able to take me as an academic advisor? And then from there, they can say yes or no. And then if they say yes, then when you do apply, I think there is a point somewhere along the application where it asks you, do you already have an advisor selected? And you say yes. I've never been down the route where I haven't selected an advisor prior to applying, but I'm assuming that it's not going to be as ideal as you finding your own advisor prior to, because essentially what they're going to do is they're just going to look to see what is the what's the first thing that's opened, and let's kind of stick you with that. And if you're not interested in that field, or you find that maybe the professor is not someone that you would maybe align yourself with, then that could be a problem, because you're going to be stuck with this advisor for the next 4 to 5 years, and that wouldn't be a good experience if you didn't have a good relationship with your advisor.
Mm-hmm. And do you, when you're new in a research lab, you're coming in to your first year out of 5 years, and you're going to be sticking with this lab, you can't really switch after that. So, what kind of projects do you work on? Is it something that you get to decide on, or are they projects that, like the head of the research lab, so the professor, I would assume, is, or like, the advisor, whatever they're working on, they kind of delegate tasks to you, or do you have a project to your name that you get to select within that field?
Yes. So there are different avenues that you can take in terms of your research. And I think this is important to establish prior to an advisor accepting you as a student and you accepting advisor as your academic advisor. You both that's part of the whole reaching out process. It's like, okay, well, they will be upfront if they aren't interested in starting a whole new project, because that can be not only time consuming and tedious, but also costly. And you really have to do your research to make sure that is this project feasible, and can I get the most reward out of this project, and also timeline wise, can I start and finish this project within the years of my degree. So you kind of have to look at all of that, and so the professor will let you know as well if they are looking to start a new project, if they have spots currently available on research projects that are already you know happening. So they say, okay, well, you can join this team. We have multiple teams for different types of research projects that you can join. Or I'm interested in starting a new project. I'm just about starting it, but I don't have a team put together. Do you want to join? So there are different things that they can do. Or they could say, hey, is there something that you're interested in that you kind of want to pursue in the same field that I'm working in? And then you could possibly pitch your idea, and then you guys can work from there to develop a project. So it really just depends. But for the most part, what I would say is don't go into a program thinking that, oh, this is what I'm interested in. I'm gonna start my own project. I'm going to start from scratch. It's going to be some like type of intervention project. And I'm going to see if this can work, and I'm going to change the world. Because it's great to have aspirations and goals to change the world and to actually do all these big things. But you do have to take into consideration the requirements of all of that. Not only like do you have to find grants and people to fund your project, but you also need to find another team, people to also volunteer and help you out, because it can't be a one-man job. You also have to look into ethics, like how long will it take me to get ethics approved? Is it feasible? So there are so many factors that take into consideration that a lot of the times professors aren't going to just start up a new project without any background information. They typically would have already done their background information for a couple years, and it just so happens that you emailed them at the time where they are ready to actually start this project. So most projects can't just start out of thin air. It's not to say that it can't do that, but the likelihood of that is rare, and it might be a turnoff to advisors or potential advisors if you say, I want to do this, this, and this, and not kind of provide like leeway for that, because then that could send a message to the advisor. It's like, okay, this person is not flexible. This is what they want to do. Hey, I'm sorry, that's not what I do, or I'm not interested in that. Goodbye. So you have to be open to doing other projects. So you can pitch what you're interested in, but also say that, but I'm like flexible, and I'm really just looking to see if I can start somewhere and then possibly see if I can take this project to the next level. That would be a better option, I would say. But yeah, you do have to reach out to your advisor and communicate what your research plans are prior to even, saying, okay, sure, I choose you,
Mm-hmm.
Pokemon reference here, as an advisor, or vice versa. So definitely have to do your research with that.
Okay, I see. When you are applying to the university, you don't need to know what project you want to work on. Well, no, like if you already have an advisor and that's when you're applying for your PhD, like you did you already know what project you were going to be doing?
So I this is obviously my first time applying to a graduate school, so I only have experience with once, but I'm assuming that most schools and most programs are similar, where when you do go to apply, part of it is saying, okay, well, can you write us something that is a potential research project or your research outline or a plan? They would just want to know, or do you have a plan? Or are you just going into this blindly? Because they
Right.
also don't
Okay.
want to waste their time with a student who's not going to produce publishable research, because at the end of the day, that's what the university wants. They want their name affiliated with actual published research. And so if your research, if you don't have a clear idea, and that idea is not something that can possibly be published, then your chances of getting into that university are now lower. So with my experience, I took the route of choosing an advisor first. I don't really know what the route would be like if you didn't choose an advisor. I'm not even sure if you would be allowed to enter. I know that was an option to kind of write down in your application, but I'm not sure what route that would take. But for me, I found an advisor. So you can never develop an entire research outline or a research protocol or plan without actually going into more detail and to having some time. So right when you meet a professor and advisor, that can't happen. But what you can do is create a general outline. Okay, so this is the project I have. These are probably the outcomes I'm looking for. These are kind of the methods that we can take to get to that outcome. So let's put it into a document. So you kind of work with your advisor, you write out a document, a research outline. They kind of go over it with you to make sure that everything seems okay. And then when you go into your interviews for the program, you kind of show them the document as well, and they have that so that then they know, okay, this person has a solid foundation for research, and this plan can change, no problem. It's not set in stone, but at least they have something going into the program. So you
Right.
don't have to have, I can switch, from my application project to now actually being in my first year and going through stuff. There's no problem with that. But they want to make sure that you have something going into it, and that it's not completely, that you're not switching completely like 180.
That makes
That
sense,
you're still,
especially because,
yeah.
each project requires so much funding and everything too. They don't have time to just like get a student on board and then their ideas are completely different and they don't align. And yeah, makes sense. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So then do you have, like, when you're working on the project that you proposed, do you like, I mean, we're all adults going into this research space, right? When you're doing a PhD, it's not like you're coming straight out of high school into a university research lab. So do they expect you to handle everything on your own, or do you get to shadow somebody? Usually, how does that work?
I think it depends on the labs that you're in and the advisors that you have. Obviously, they will never just throw you in blindly
Mm-hmm.
into a research project and say, "Okay, do this. We want this outcome. Figure it
Yeah.
out." They'll never do that, for sure not. There's always going to be students that are working on the project years before you or even months before you, and they have a kind of an idea, so they always pair you up. Obviously, if you're starting a completely new project, you won't have that support system necessarily because it's just you, but you are going to still be assigned a team, and that team is going to have you know some background and some knowledge as well. They're not just going to make a team of just first year students that have no experience at all. But you also have to take into consideration that going into this program, you do have to have a research background. You
Okay.
have to come up with something. If you're an undergrad and you have no research experience, you've done nothing with research, the likelihood of you entering this specific program that I'm in is very slim,
Or even a
especially if you
general
haven't done.
PhD. It's kind of like you always
Yeah.
need to do a dissertation,
Yeah.
all that stuff.
Right. Because if you're going to do the route that I took and go straight from undergrad, you need to make sure that your undergrad was strong in research, because
Mm-hmm.
obviously when you go into your master's, there's always going to be a research component that's kind of forced into your degree. Whether you're doing an internship or a thesis based master's, there's still some research based that kind of gives you an idea. But from an undergraduate degree, there's never a promise that you're going to do research, so you have to kind of take initiative and make sure that you have that background because of this whole situation.
Mm-hmm.
There could be a time where you're starting a new project and you need to have some kind of background. They're not going to, again, throw you in blind, but you need to kind of make sure that you understand the basis because they're not going to hold your hand forever. Um, I was in a unique situation with COVID. So I wasn't actually, my first year was all online and I wasn't actually able to go in person. We did a lot of lab type meetings through Zoom. So I was able to meet people that way, but to actually learn like, hands on skills from other people was not an option for me. Or to even just kind of work around different people and different professors and gain their knowledge or experience that way. So it was very independent in that sense, but I was very fortunate enough to choose an advisor who was very supportive of me and who still and continues to empathize with me, knowing that I haven't done a master's program. So knowing that I have these limitations, but then trying to help me achieve them. So even today, I received an email from my advisor, and there are these little modules free that are offered at the university that would benefit my research project. It's not to no, it's not necessarily teaching me specifically how to write my research project or how to write a thesis, but it is going to provide me with a little bit of the knowledge of statistics. So when I do go to conduct my research, I have knowledge to say, okay, maybe this is a good plan, maybe this isn't a good plan. So there are always different ways, even beyond courses, that you can get that knowledge, but you have to take initiative and do that, because if you're just following what the requirements of the university, you're just going to do your PhD courses and you might not do well because you don't have that background. And you just have the basis for that. So if you don't have any knowledge behind it, make sure you take advantage of whatever the university is offering.
So you're just continuously working on one project the entire time. And do you need to publish a paper by the time you graduate?
The thing with this is that the main thesis project for your PhD has three different components. So three sub studies, I should say. So they all revolve around the same topic, but they're all independent studies. So you're basically conducting these three separate studies. You could attain all of that data from one kind of collection, but when you go to actually do data analysis and go to write it out and have these hypotheses and then these outcomes and these discussions, there are going to be three separate studies that come from that one topic. In addition to that, you also have to complete your comprehensive exams. And so a comprehensive exam isn't just an exam that you're sitting there writing and you're just going to pass. A comprehensive exam is basically a mini thesis that needs to be conducted prior to starting your project, essentially. You have your advisory committee that is related to your main thesis project, but then you have your comps committee, which is related to your comprehensive exams. And essentially, you have to create a completely separate study. You have to start and finish it within, I think, 5 or 6 months, and then you have to present it. So you propose it and then you defend it within this like 5 to 6 month period. And if your comps exam committee thinks that you are capable of starting and finishing a research project, then only can you continue on with your major thesis. So there are multiple different studies that you are doing, and you could also be helping out someone else with their project too. It's not going to be on your thesis, but your name will be on their project when they go to publish it and stuff. So that's the other thing. You're not just kind of focusing on yourself. Majority of it's going to be on your own research project, but there are all going to be times too where you're going to be, volunteering and helping with other students and their projects and all these other labs. So you are doing research projects simultaneously from all over. So it's never just this one project that you stick to and that's all you're focusing on for the next 5 years. And so I think that's kind of when people are like, oh, it's just one project, 5 years, no problem. You end up having to do so much more.
So you don't need to have research published by the time you graduate, but you do need to defend and present what you have.
Your research project that you choose to do for your thesis and your comprehensive exams should be publishable material.
Okay,
So you
publishable, but
should,
it doesn't have to be a published paper in order to graduate.
I do not think so.
Okay.
I believe your comps exam, it's almost like 99% like you should publish it. Like it's almost like once you defend it, then you go back and forth with your comps committee to kind of revise it so that it can be submitted to a journal. And then even then when the journal reviews it, you get comments back. So you continuously simultaneously go through these comments back and forth, and your advisory committee basically makes sure or ensures that we have done everything we can to publish that. So most people end up publishing their comps exams. So
Oh, I see.
I don't know if you don't publish your exams, you won't be able to graduate, but I'm pretty sure it's almost a mandatory thing. Obviously, there are exceptions.
Okay.
But your actual final thesis, um, I don't think that has to be published in a journal or any of that sort prior to graduating. But near post graduation is when you should be publishing. But my level of knowledge in physiotherapy in terms of what I learn is the same as a physiotherapist who's just done their 2 years of masters. So I'm not looking to necessarily get paid more. I might get paid more in certain fields, but in a clinical field, I would be at the same level as another physiotherapist if we have the same years of experience. Because most of it comes down to obviously individual persons and how much do you know and how much you can apply, but also to the years that you've experienced as well, right? So me doing my PhD isn't so that I can just work as a physiotherapist but make more money. It is so that I can go into that research field and I can kind of incorporate both my physiotherapy and my research.
So you would, so would you not be considered overqualified then for trying to get a physiotherapy job versus someone who went to a master's program and that's all they needed?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily call it overqualified. I would just say it would be very unnecessary if you were going to go into this field of doing your PhD and all of that and only wanting to be a physiotherapist because um the advantages of it is just personal growth. Obviously, you can learn about research and do all these different things, but aside from that, you've just wasted a lot of your time if you're not interested in research, and a lot of your money as well, just so that you could have done the same thing that someone did with a 2 years master's degree,
Mm-hmm.
right?
I
So
see.
you really do have to think about what you want and what you're passionate about and how you want to pursue that so that you can take the path of least resistance.
So because your end goal is to possibly also be able to teach, right?
Exactly.
Right.
So once I'm kind of like slowing down in like my research and my physiotherapy, it's kind of like, okay, now I can kind of transition into teaching about the field of rehabilitation.
Cool. So I think that about wraps it up. We covered, your undergraduate degree as well as what you're working in right now, and then your PhD and what you hope to do in the future. And thank you for sharing all that. I hope this is going to be informative for anybody listening or any high school students thinking of, or even anybody thinking of switching into the field of physiotherapy. So, any last notes?
First of all, thank you for having me. I definitely appreciate you taking your time to listen to my stories. Um, but just a general note, I think a lot of the times, especially high school students, they feel rushed into choosing their career paths. They think that they need to decide something now and they need to do it now. That being said, yes, you should have an idea about what you want. And if you feel like, you're ending your high school career and you don't even have an inkling of what you want, then it is your job to find out what you want. Sometimes school doesn't provide that for you, unfortunately. So go out there, volunteer, learn about different career paths because we only know that main, the traditional career paths that we all kind of take, doctor, firefighter, whatever it is, policeman. But there are all these other specific niches that you can go into that's probably ideal for you, but you just don't know exist. So take the opportunity to do a lot of research online to figure out what, courses you like, what subjects you're interested in, and what kind of careers you can take and how to get there. Because if there's a career that you want to take or you're possibly interested in, but to get there requires you to do a lot of these hard things, make sure that it's worth it. Because if you're like, okay, I want to go into medicine, but you don't specifically know what you want to go into, and you spend all this time going into medicine and you do your MCATs and now you're in med school, but then you realize that, you know, being a family physician isn't something you're interested, being a surgeon isn't something you're interested in. Now it's like you've not wasted, but you had all this time and you spent all this time and this money to get here, and you realize it's not what you want to do. So there's no rush in choosing your career path, but definitely do your research and don't hold anybody else accountable for that. It's kind of up to you to do that and to take initiative and find out what you like. And the faster you do that, the faster you can choose a path that you might not switch out of.
Right. That's
Not
a
to
good
say that
point.
it's bad to switch out of it. A lot of people I know by third year undergrad, they realize that what they're in is not what they want and they switch, which is not ideal in terms of the time you spent. But hey, at least it's in terms of your lifespan, it's only a little bit of time because your career is what's gonna be the end goal. So as long as it's kind of like the saying, like, better late than never, right? But you want to set yourself up so it's not late so that
Yeah.
you're not wasting your time and your money. So just really think about that prior to going into any career.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And thank you again so much for joining. And I think we will close with that. So that's the end of the episode. To leave a listener voicemail or support this podcast, check out the links in the description. You can connect with me on Instagram at the Birds Donuts Podcast, and you can find this podcast on all major music platforms, including Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Music, and more. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.